Is it Molly or?
It's me. I'm recording.
Oh, hey,
Oh, you are
hey, Molly.
recording. Are you, Molly, are you also like letting people in the waiting room?
Yep, I will be in charge of that.
All right. Well, welcome everyone to Balkan Circle. We'll actually shut your this. Not my.
It's Adam Hansel from Pride.
Most of us. There we go. Hi, Adam. Okay, welcome everyone to Balkan Circle. My name is Mary Nieberger. I'm a professor of history here at UT Austin, and also the director of the Center for Russian History and Eurasian Studies. Kirill.
Thank you very much. I'm very honored my name is Kirill Avermov, and I'm an assistant professor of political science at the Department of Slavic and Eurasian Studies. And I'm also part of the center that Mary directs. And we're very happy that for yet another year, we're opening Balkan Circle 2025. This is our first session, and today we do have a very interesting topic. At least I'm very interested, because for people that are considering all things Balkan to be very interesting, for sure, sport and social division when it comes to Yugoslavia. I'm assuming I have, we'll be talking about football, not soccer.
Yes.
Right. And how sport and social life interacts. So it's our pleasure to introduce our speaker today, which I'll pass to Mary.
Yes, so I'd like to introduce Blaise Joel, who's a postdoctoral fellow here at UT Austin in the America in the World Consortium. He graduated with a PhD in history from the University of California, Berkeley, not too long ago. His research focuses on nationalism, memory, violence, and identity in 20th century Europe. His first book project, titled The Last Berlin Walls in Europe, Conflict, Memory, and Social Division in the former Yugoslavia, Northern Ireland, and the Basque Country, examines how commemoration, education, and sports have worked to keep communities apart in the aftermath of inter-ethnic violence. By analyzing the process through which societies become divided and through which division is maintained after conflict, this project broadens the definition of and reconceptualizes divided societies by focusing on the social elements. So prior to his Berkeley stint, Blaise graduated with a degree in history and anthropology from Dartmouth College and earned an MA and MSc from Columbia and the London School of Economics. So take it away, Blaise.
Well, thank you so much for having me and for everyone for being here, both in person and online. As Mary mentioned, this is a chapter out of my first book project, looking at sports and how they impact social division in the former Yugoslavia, Northern Ireland, the Basque Country. I wanted to bring that comparative element to it for this talk to keep it definitely grounded in the Balkans, but show that these patterns exist in other places. And for time purposes, I will, yes, just be talking about soccer. There's a great ESPN documentary about basketball and the breakup of Yugoslavia called Once Brothers that I would highly recommend if you're interested. With that, I will take it away. So before I get into full topic, I just want to talk a little bit about social division. I'll try to do this quickly, as quickly as possible. But when people think of social division, they think of a place like Mostar, pictured obviously on the bottom, or Belfast, pictured on the top. A place where it's two ethnic groups, roughly equal in population size, that live separate lives in separate parts of a community. And while that is definitely the case, what I'm trying to argue in my project is that it's a broader sense, and that it's the perception of that other and perception of your difference from the other that matters more than the demographics, the geography necessarily. And I think that's something that really comes through sports, is where you see this more social side of social division. So just to talk about, again, briefly, before I get into the case studies about how sports, nationalism, and social division interact. George Orwell famously wrote that sports are that sports are war minus the shooting. Eric Hobsbawm says that the imagined community of millions never seems more real than if it's a team of 11 named people. And Franjo Tuchman, so people from way across the political spectrum, once said that after war, sport is the first thing by which you can distinguish a nation. So in the former Yugoslavia, Northern Ireland, and the Basque Country, as ethnic tensions ramped up in these conflicts, they boiled over onto the sporting fields as fans put ethnic labels on teams. Governments used sports as proof of their sovereignty, and even some teams embraced their roles as ethnic torchbearers. Due to the totalizing nature of the violence in each of these cases, and the deep levels of social division and ethnic exclusivism that they engendered, sports were a natural location for symbolic contestation. Their way to bring in ordinary people to support a larger cause during the conflicts and use already existing venues to coalesce ethnic identity. Therefore, they could be used as a battleground during the conflicts and have, during peacetime, been allowed to maintain that role and maintain that identification. And they allow ethnic groups to face off, even in peacetime, when there's really no situation in which they would. As two scholars of Northern Ireland argue, sport provides a wider sociopolitical landscape within which cultural fragmentation and discord are interwoven. I'm going to start off by talking about fan-led processes. And in this portion, I'm going to be talking about Croatia and Northern Ireland. So as you can see from the images that are on screen now, these are all, you have a fan tifo from Red Star Belgrade of the Serbian flag with Kosovo in the middle. You have another fan banner, again from Red Star Belgrade, of Vukovar, written in Cyrillic script. And then you have a mural in South Zagreb, made by the Bad Blue Boys, which is the hooligan group for Dinamo Zagreb, putting together Zagreb, their hooligan group, and Vukovar with the water tower in the background. And so to start off sort of more broadly about fan culture, it's inextricable from sports, especially soccer, as these images show. And during the breakup of Yugoslavia and the Troubles, the lines between fandom and ethnicity became very blurry. In the Balkans, teams became coded as ethnic by both the in and the out groups. For example, Dinamo Zagreb and Hajduk Split became Croat teams virtually overnight. Red Star Belgrade and Partizan Belgrade became Serb teams. Željo and Mostar in Sarajevo and Mostar's Velaj became Bosniak teams. In Northern Ireland, teams had a pre-existing connotation with Catholic or Protestant, but those lines became reinforced by the events of the Troubles, as I will get into. So, as Yugoslavia was disintegrating politically, its soccer sphere was becoming similarly polarized, thanks to the hooligan groups. As you can see from the list here, other than Hajduk Split's Torcida and Partizan's Grobari, which is Gravediggers, the hooligan groups did not really exist in the former Yugoslavia until after Tito dies. So as the country politically is becoming more federalized and as the economy is worsening, et cetera, these hooligan groups start to pop up. So you have Red Army for Velej in Mostar, founded in 1981, the Bad Blue Boys in 1986, just notice that typo. Hordezla for Horde of Evil for FK Sarajevo, the Maniacs for Željo, the Leșinari or Vultures, the Armada, Rijeka, all founded in 1987, Kohorta in Osijek in 88, and Delie, which is roughly heroes. There's not like a one-to-one translation, but roughly heroes for Red Star Belgrade in 1989. And much like the emergence of hooligan groups in Britain, this was largely a movement of disaffected younger men who were losing their place in society, were losing their place in the economy. And as the political and economic situation worsened, as you can see, these groups became more and more popular and more institutionalized. As Zoran Timic, the choreographer for Delie for much of the post-war era, told The Guardian in 2004, football was a base for people to rebel against communism. Hooliganism became a way of showing that we were free. So from the beginning, there are notable exceptions, Rijeka's Armada and the Red Army and Velej. They were very Yugoslav, very socialist ethos groups. All of the rest had right-wing politics and were sort of at the emerging forefront of the anti-Yugoslav movement. So the things as the hooligan groups became more and more established, violence between them, as with violence between hooligan groups in the 1970s and 1980s across Europe, became more and more prevalent. One study found that 48% of all soccer-related arrests in the country in the late 1980s happened at games between Dinamo Zagreb and Red Star Belgrade. And games between Partizan and Dinamo Zagreb featured the second highest percentage of arrests. So the primary actors in this were the Bad Blue Boys, Torcida, Delia, the Grobari as well, to a lesser extent than those three. And as the editor of Belgrade Sport newspaper warned in February 1990, there's a threat of civil war in the stadiums. Slogans of hate will now not only be accompanied by stones and lumps of concrete, but perhaps tomorrow by bursts of machine gun fire, time bombs in the changing rooms, grenades among young people of this sadly divided and poisoned Yugoslav land. All of those things ended up happening in the 90s. There were bombs placed in changing rooms. There were, as I will get to, the hooligans formed some of the early brigades for both sides of the war and paramilitary groups. As polarization only increased, especially following the appointment of Arkan, real name Željko Ražnatović, who I will talk a little bit more about later, as leader of Delije in early 1990. He was brought into the role at the urging of Slobodan Milošević via Jovica Stanisic, who was then head of the State Security Service. And he understood that Red Star could be for him what Real Madrid were for Franco, or the Italy team playing in black shirts were for Mussolini, a force of power and influence in a wider society. And on May 13th, 1990, 1 week after Franjo Tuđman's HTC won an overwhelming majority in parliament, Red Star came to Zagreb. Delije, including Arkan and the Bad Blue Boys, clashed in the streets and in the stadium. And I'm going to get out of PowerPoint and have to share a different screen.
The video?
To show the video, yes, because it's an age-restricted video, so I can't show it in PowerPoint.
Well, the thing is that, like, fantastic that you have the
Yeah.
document, not fantastic, but I think I know what you'll show.
Things became very chaotic, as this video will show. The enduring image of the afternoon, which comes about 2 minutes in, I will flag as it's happening, was Dinamo captain Zvonimir Boban, who kicked a policeman, Rafik Ahmetović, Bosniak, although his identity has mostly been lost to the narrative. On May 14th, the front page of Zagreb Sportske Novosti ran the headline, "Fans of Zvezda knowingly caused the worst incident." In an article headlined "Escalation of Hatred and Violence," they reported that, "Since we have been in this business, we have never experienced anything so depressing. From the moment when the night trains from Belgrade dumped loads of vandals on Zagreb's main station, the party of nationalists and the spreading of chauvinism and terror on the peaceful streets of Zagreb began. Several fierce fights broke out between the police and the elite fan regiments from Belgrade, and one policeman was seriously injured." Zagreb's charity list took a similar tone. Front page was headlined "Hatred, Blood, and Tears," and lamented that the first federal soccer league began to die at the Maximir, and placed the blame on Red Star fans.
Mhm.
The Serbian press, unsurprisingly, said the opposite. Belgrade's Politica dedicated a full page to the riot, blaming the incident on Dinamo fans. It was also was the only of the 4 major newspapers in Croatia and Belgrade to publish the iconic photograph, which you'll see a number of murals of, and you'll see here in a little bit on the video of Boban kicking the policeman. A fan magazine, Tempo, also did. The author of the piece in Politica was incensed by Boban, saying, "Here is the kick." Then Zvonimir Boban made a move, which of course he was rewarded with applause, but which cannot serve him as a young man. He was on the side of those who fought against the policemen. In the presence of the excited spectators, he took a long run, jumped up, and knocked down a policeman. There was a flood that threatened scandal from both sides. Some demanded the rise of Ban Jelačić, and others Draža's guards. So that's sort of the end of it. a fire truck comes on, that's kind of the, but that's the end of, and of course, as you see, he is now getting escorted off by fans. To keep him safe from the police. So go back to the PowerPoint. So this incident occurs in May. There's another famous incident that I don't have time to really get into in September of that year when Partizan Belgrade visits Hajduk Split, and Hajduk fans decide to take down the Yugoslav flag, set it on fire, and raise it back up the flagpole. So things are escalating, and as if you know your Yugoslav history timeline, things are like the war is about to start at this point. So that fall, Arkan took his hooligans to the front lines. On October 11th, 1990, he formed the Serbian Volunteer Guard, colloquially known as Arkan's Tigers. That, well, the gentleman smiling in the Popeye shirt is Arkan. So many of the Tigers were members of Delia, many of the rest were Grobari. And so it was a combination originally of the hooligans of the two Belgrade teams, primarily. Who peaked between 500 and 1,000 members, and they were key present in many of the key moments of the break of Yugoslavia. Vukovar and Osijek, Prijedor, Zvornik, and Bijeljina. There was I forget the publication. There's a Rolling Stone piece from a couple years ago that detailed the Arkan's Tigers' involvement in Bijeljina, including the infamous and iconic photograph of one of them kicking a person on the ground in Bijeljina. In a radio address following the fall of Vukovar, Arkan even directly threatened the mayor of Osijek, saying, "Mr. Kramaric, you are an intelligent person, a humanitarian. Do not allow the beautiful city of Osijek to come to grief. Do not allow the Ustasha to conduct their bloody feast in it. Hand over the keys to the city. We will come as liberators, and we will make war only on the football pitches." This wasn't just a Serbian phenomenon. Bad Blue Boys and Torcida also flocked to the front lines, joining military formations, probably in significantly higher proportions than adherents of other subcultural styles in their age group. Authors have argued that these hooligan groups became a war vanguard that helped mobilize society to build popular support for the conflict. And if you go around Croatia today, you will see many murals like this one from Zagreb that connect the Bad Blue Boys, as you can see there on the left, BBB, with different military regiments. Yeah. So within a year of the fighting, 17 members of Torcida and 60 Bad Blue Boys had been killed in Croatia. The actions of the hooligans also came back to the terrorists. Red Stars magazine ran pieces on the Tigers. And during a game in March of 1992 at a Belgrade derby between Partizan and Red Star, approximately 20 Tigers entered the arena carrying road signs that read 20 miles to Vukovar, 10 miles to Vukovar, welcome to Vukovar, to thunderous applause. And in Croatia, in June of 1992, Hajduk fans brandished a Cyrillic sign riddled with bullets, bearing the name of the Serbian autonomous region of Tesovčići. But the riot itself that I showed the video of gained a life of its own. It has, I termed it on that slide, the kick that started the war. That is what it is known as in Croatia today. It has morphed into this event that jump-started the dissolution of Yugoslavia. And that's something that happened almost immediately. So on May 15th, 1990, there was a cartoon in Zagreb's Večernji List that depicts a Yugoslav policeman standing in a destroyed Dinamo stadium. A flag bearing the Serbian cross, numerous pennants and bones are also visible. Two men stand looking at the policeman saying, "The authorities have failed. They proved to be politically determined." Also on May 15th in Sportske Novosti, there was an interview with someone who was injured during the riot, a Dinamo fan, who said that he had been shot during the riot. And when describing the event, he asked, "Who would watch it calmly? I guess only the security authorities. What kind of man would he be who would not remain cool if a guest came into your house, started breaking everything in your home, and then beat you up? The passivity of the police is inexplicable. Because of their action, we had to react and protect our people, our club, and the stadium. It certainly would not have come to excess if the security authorities had prevented the incident of Red Star fans. On May 13th, 1994, so 4 years later, this monument in the top left was erected on the grounds of Zagreb's Maksimir Stadium. It is dedicated to all the Dinamo fans for whom the war started on May 13th, 1990, and ended with them laying down their lives on the altar of their Croatian homeland. Since 1994, it's been the site of annual commemorations of the riot, undertaken by both the team and the Bad Blue Boys in separate events. Even outside, the monument has become a place for votive candles, rosaries, and plaques from various Bad Blue Boys clubs across Croatia. This is a photo from May 13th of 2022. It's for the 20th anniversary. Sports University ran a special retrospective headline "The Day When It Was Said Enough." And it was when the Boban's kick was reframed as a blow to the repressive Yugoslav apparatus and a symbol of resistance against the 70-year Serbian domination of Yugoslavia for all people who have the Croatian homeland in their hearts. The Maksimir myth, of course, does not mirror reality. That's why it's a myth. Boban, at the time, despite later claiming that he did this as some massive act of Croat resistance, at the time, a month later, June 1990, gave an interview in which he said that was headlined, "I did not attack Yugoslavia," and continued to play for the Yugoslav national team until 1991.
That's Vladimir Boban.
Yes, Vladimir Boban, yeah. But the myth allows for the symbolic presence of Serbs in the Croatian popular imaginary when the individual clubs don't play each other and Croatia and Serbia rarely play each other. In fact, it was but FIFA and UEFA both banned them from playing each other for a period of time after the conflict. But as you can see, and as I'll detail on the next slides, it's become very popular in murals. So this is the most iconic one in the bottom left. There's now a mural of the 2018 World Cup runner-up soccer team above it that also intersperses some imagery from Vukovar. But it's become so popular, there's now a mural of the mural. So it's a mural of a kid looking at the first mural. And I'll sort of highlight through these quickly to get into the fan culture of it all. So these are hooligan murals that I saw in Serbia, all around Belgrade. So the two on the top are both at Red Star Belgrade Stadium. So you can see one has Kosovo, has a map of Kosovo. The other that's sort of off to the side there is
Maracana, right?
Yes, the Maracana, yeah. It's a hat, it's a general's hat that is popularly associated with Ratko Mladic. So whenever you see graffiti of Ratko Mladic, as you see in the photo below, he's wearing that same hat. That is a partisan, that's a Grovati mural that has been vandalized a number of times and then repainted and protected. There at times there has even been like a protective guard standing around it to prevent it from being vandalized. So you can see there's red paint underneath from where it had recently been vandalized. The photo on the bottom left is of FK Obilic, which is a mostly defunct team. It still exists, but they're like a couple of tiers down now in Belgrade. That after the war was owned by Archon, and there's a great history of that team where he basically bribed his way to become a national champion and be in the Champions League. He bribed and intimidated his way through the league. Here is all in Bosnia. There's a ton here, but you have in Banja Luka, you have the outline of the Republic Srpska, Ratko Mladic, Kosovo with Never Surrender. You have Slobodan Praljak painted on a mural in Mostar. You have a Srebrenica mural in Mostar. I want to draw your attention to the graffiti on the bottom right of Mostar, starting both with the Ustasha U in between it. And you have on the top, that is in Prijedor, and that is I do not read Russian, but
Which one?
On the top, Brothers Forever. Brothers Forever. Yeah.
Bracia, which is Brothers
Brothers
Forever.
Forever, Slava with a Z.
Mhm.
And then as a mirror to that, you have in Croatia, Slava Ukraini. Because all these photos were taken in 2022. But you have a number of connections to Vukovar here. In these murals, these three are in split, including showing members of Torcida guarding the Ovčara massacre memorial. So to move to Northern Ireland, you see a very similar process. So Northern Ireland is different. I don't have time to address this in the talk, but in where there's a completely separate sporting apparatus set up for Catholic kids through Gaelic sports. But soccer is one of the few opportunities where there can be mixing and can be direct competition. So it's not surprising that teams and all that get coded in this language. Over the course of Northern Irish history, two teams that were coded as Catholic were forced to withdraw from the league. The first being Belfast Celtic in 1948 or 1949, sorry, after a riot in 1948. And that loss of that community left a huge hole for Catholics, especially in Belfast. One person wrote in 1998, reflecting on it 50 years later, that for Belfast beleaguered Catholics, Celtic provided a thrilling counterpoint to the weary reality of day-to-day life. This feeling was only compounded when Derry City FC left the Northern Irish League in October 1972. Its stadium is, if anyone is familiar at all with the geography of Derry, there's a Catholic side of the river and then a Protestant side of the river. Its stadium is in the Catholic side of the river, although it drew support as the only team in the area from both communities. That obviously changed with the Troubles, but because of its location, the Irish Football Association declared it to be unsafe as the Troubles escalated. So on January 7th, 1969, 3 days after the Burnpallet Bridge incident, if any of you have watched the Hulu series Say Nothing, it is in the, I think, first or second episode. It's when there's a big march from Belfast to Derry, and there's basically walk into an ambush and people start throwing stones at the marchers, etc. And after the Battle of the Bogside, Derry City did not play a home league game until October 18th. The Battle of the Bogside is in August of 1969. So they don't play a home league game until October 18th. 10 weeks after its prior home game, an Ulster Cup game on August 9th. Between August 9th and September 4th, the team did not play a game at all. Both matches against Linfield, who I'll talk about a little later, they're a very Protestant coded team. That season were affected. The away game was disrupted by violence, and the return fixture played at the Brandywell was not played, as the RUC feared a breach of the peace if it went ahead. And then as the situation escalated and internment gets imposed in 1971, there's more issues. The SDLP and the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association used the stadium for a rally to encourage a campaign of civil disobedience. But that, in the Protestant mind, marked the club as explicitly Catholic, and there was no turning back at that point. On September 10th, shots were fired from the stadium at soldiers during riots after a British Army Land Rover crushed a 7-year-old boy. And on September 11th, Ballymena United came to the Brandywell, but Catholic youth stoned the team bus and set it on fire. That would prove to be the last game that Derry City ever played within the Northern Irish League system. The RUC at the Brandywell. So the RUC declared that it was unsafe and forced them to move to Coleraine, which is about 40 miles away, which threatened to financially ruin the club. And as compensation, the IFA granted the club £500. For context, it made £33 from a cup game that it played there. It kept petitioning to try to return to the Brandywell, but the league kept denying it, citing safety concerns. And if you look at votes, it is the majority Protestant teams always voting against it, and they would have the majority in the league to prevent it from coming back. So they applied each of the next 13 years, but it was rejected each time due to security fears. And in 1984, they even proposed a new ground outside of the Bogside neighborhood, including over in the Protestant side of the city, but were turned down, again, citing safety concerns. Ultimately, they ended up joining the League of Ireland. So the team from Derry Londonderry plays in the Republic of Ireland League instead of the Northern Irish League. They're one of only a small number of teams in Europe to play not in their home country's league. But that stain of that's quote unquote stain of Catholicism has not gone away. Next slide. In 1985, a Protestant from the city told a reporter that he would not, despite being a lifelong supporter, ever return to the stadium. Saying the majority of the crowd was not only intent on annoying those people who were not of their own religious persuasion, they seem to have found a vehicle for their bigotry that they have searched for years, and I do not want to be a part of that scene. In 1995, a local sports writer maintained that Protestants from the waterside still would not attend games. So even though those teams are not, Belfast, Celtic, and Derry City are not in the Irish soccer pyramid, they're still a Catholic team, and that is Cliftonville FC, which is in Belfast. Its stadium is located near the Ardoyne neighborhood of Belfast, which is a Catholic neighborhood surrounded by Protestant neighborhoods. And that is clearly demarcated as, quote, alien territory in the Protestant imaginary due to its location. It was concretized by the fact that Linfield, who is a Protestant team I'll talk about in a sec, did not play a game at Cliftonville Stadium from 1970 to 1998. So for almost the entirety of the Troubles, did not travel what is less than 5 miles to play a game. Additionally, the Northern Irish Police recommended the Cliftonville home games against Glentoran, the principal East Belfast team, be played in the afternoon, not the evening, to try to cut down on hooligan violence. Today, Cliftonville fans embrace this outsider identity and position the club among other left-wing fandoms in Europe. Walking around Catholic parts of the city, you'll see stickers that are similar to this flag, which I took at a game, a Cliftonville versus Linfield game. Saw that flag flying. That positions them as the rebels' choice, along with St. Pauli in Germany, Athletic Club de Bilbao, and not on the flag, but often on the stickers, Glasgow's Celtic FC.
Yeah, the hallmarks of the working
Yes.
class.
And at this game that I attended, there was also a flag. I didn't put it in the slideshow. That it was the Irish flag, and it had the Cliftonville badge in the middle, and on the other side it had the Catalan flag, the Irish Four Province flag, the Basque flag, and the Palestinian flag. As one sort of amalgamated flag. Now Linfield, the team that I've referred to a few times, was not founded as a Protestant club, but the association grew in the early years of the 20th century, and by the time the Troubles began, the club and Protestant loyalism were inseparable. This was in large part because Linfield failed to employ a Catholic player or coach from the 1950s to the 1980s. The alleged staff and policy gained recognition in 1982 when Sunday Life drew attention to the comments made by then manager in a Linfield fanzine. He made it clear that under the prevailing circumstances, he could not envisage signing a Catholic player. Threatened to cost them sponsorships. Coca-Cola threatened to pull their sponsorship from the Irish Football Association. So they held a press conference and named 70 Catholics who had played for the team since its founding in 1886. However, an analysis was done of the names, and many of the individuals did play for the clubs in the post-war area. Most did so before the Troubles began. And very few Catholics have played for Linfield since that time. And almost all of them have been recruited from outside of Northern Ireland. Now, they have done a lot to improve that connotation. They've partnered with the GAA in 2005 to head a eliminate racism and sectarianism from sport campaign, but these sentiments are harder to overcome, and you will still see, as I showed a couple slides ago, Union Jack flags flying at all Linfield games. Now, Protestants also, there's a huge mural culture in Northern Ireland, and they've tried to incorporate sports within the mural culture. A couple ways that this is done is through invoking, Northern Ireland's own George Best, dubbed the Fifth Beatle, one of soccer's first real celebrities when he played for Man United. Fun fact, he was dismissed by the local Northern Ireland team by Glentoran for being too small. They said he didn't have a spot in their academy, and then he got discovered by Man United. But as you can see, sort of on the side of this mural, you see the big orange wall. That is a mural of a member of the UDA that was, quote, murdered by the enemies of Ulster. So by placing George Best directly next to this unambiguously Protestant symbol, it is staking that claim that George Best is one of us. And you also see this with the national team. The national team has a long history of there is a long history of some Catholics facing issues when they played on the national team. Famously, there was someone who had to quit the national team in the 1980s, I think late 80s, early 90s, over threats that he received. He was a Catholic from Northern Ireland, played on the national team, and played for Glasgow Celtic, and quit because of threats and death threats he and his family received for suiting up for Northern Ireland. But as you can see in this mural, the association is with the Union Jack in the stands. These two are in the same neighborhood, the same Protestant neighborhood, Belfast. I'll be quick about this, but so the divisions in Northern Ireland are reinforced by Glasgow's Old Firm Derby between Rangers and Celtic. I showed the image earlier of them redoing Rangers Stadium. Rangers is a team that had a similar signing policy, allegedly for a number of years. So it has long been identified as a Protestant team and Celtic as a Catholic team. This mural is in Belfast in a Catholic neighborhood. And so you have these tensions from across the Irish Sea coming back and forth. These are by far the two most popular teams in Northern Ireland, are these two Scottish teams. And to give a sense, there was a 2002 report by the Northern Ireland Community Relations Council that found that among children aged 3 to 6, 78% said they had a preference for one team's jersey over the other. 77% of Protestants said they preferred the Rangers shirt. Children made sectarian connections. A 6-year-old Protestant said that a Catholic wears a Celtic jersey because they support it. A 6-year-old Catholic described a Rangers shirt as probably for the Protestant players. A 5-year-old Catholic described a Rangers jersey as a marching jumper, connecting it to the 12th of July celebrations. The Rangers and Celtics also come up in context divorce from sports. A Catholic 5-year-old said that Catholic is someone who likes Celtic. A 6-year-old Protestant described a Protestant as someone who lives here. The flag is red, white, and blue. They support Rangers. A 3-year-old Catholic said that the Union Jack was a Rangers flag, and a 4-year-old Catholic called the Irish flag the Celtic flag. The Derby's connections to Northern Ireland prompted Alistair Campbell, then advisor to Tony Blair and one of the chief negotiators of the Good Friday Agreement, to write a memo on April 12th, 1998, just 2 days after the agreement was signed, proposing that the Old Firm Derby be played in Belfast to commemorate the occasion. It did not go anywhere because I think a lot of people saw that it could be a massive security issue, and it did not receive a follow-up. So now to get to the state-led processes, and I know time. So soccer was used by many countries as a means of asserting sovereignty. Is especially true in the Balkans as the country was disintegrating. I'm mostly going to talk about Bosnian Croatian Serbs, but in Bosnia, at one point there were 3 separate national teams. The Bosnian Croats had a team, the Bosnian Serbs had a team, and the Bosniaks had a team, and 3 separate leagues that all played, all 3 separate national leagues. But so I'm going to talk about the Bosnian Serbs and the Croatian Serbs. But I'm happy to take questions on any of the others. So the Bosnian Serbs, to give an idea of how important this was, the Republika Srpska Football Association was founded in September of 1992, just 1 month after Prijedor's concentration camps were just discovered, quote unquote, by Western journalists. A cup competition followed in 1993 and 1994, and a league in 1995-96, which existed independently until 2002, when it was assumed in as one of Bosnia's second-tier leagues. Part of the reason that the league wasn't formed until late was logistics. A lot of the answers in this section of like why things were so complicated and hodgepodge is because of logistics. I mean, looking at the shape of the Republika Srpska and the constantly shifting front line, it's very hard to organize travel all around there. Same with, even worse, in the Republic of Serbian Croatia and Croatia, because it has 2 parts that are not geographically connected to each other. So competitions were rare. There were cup competitions. There's in fact no sort of concrete list of every team that played in the RSK league because it changed so frequently. Um, but part of it is also ideological. Banja Luka's team, Borac, played in the Serbian league until 1995, and in fact tried to like mask where the team was really from, so they didn't get in trouble with UEFA and FIFA. Um, but soccer was inextricably linked to both politics and military. The final for the initial Republika Srpska Cup held in Banja Luka had all the trappings of a state. It was held to honor the Bosnian Serb army. Ratko Mladic was supposed to present the trophy, but could not attend. And Milan Gvero, who was later convicted as part of the joint criminal enterprise in Srebrenica, filled in. And soon after the 1982 ceasefire in Croatia, the Republic of Serbia and Krajina did the same thing. On July 25th, the Football Association was formed, and on August 11th, the Ministry of Physical Culture sent out a request to municipal sports organizations for information about local teams and officers so that the league could begin at the end of August. So within 7 months of the ceasefire being declared, they want to start a soccer league. In October of 1992, almost 1 year after the fall of Vukovar, a team from Borovo Selo, which is a Serb community just outside of Vukovar, sent a request to the RSK government asking for security for a playing friendly between the team and Partizan Belgrade, to be played in the presence of the commander of the local militia station, 20 members of a militia group from Knin, and in the presence of the then president of the RSK. Soccer was used in support of Greater Serbianism. The RS and the RSK staged 2 international matches during the war in December 1992 in Banja Luka and May 1993 in Knin. The initiative for the game in Knin was quote given by the commander of the RS Army, General Ratko Mladic. The Ministry of Physical Culture and Sports worked to emphasize Serbness for the teams before the game, planning excursions to the Krka Monastery and the Knin Fortress, visits with the commander of the army, the president of the RSK government, and the president of the Knin municipality, and visits to some labor collectives and to some war veterans. The weekend also featured an alumni game between Dinar Knin and Borac Banja Luka. The international competitions weren't just in soccer, weren't just for professional soccer. Youth soccer played a game in June of 1993. A karate competition was scheduled. Basketball, men's and women's basketball, men's and women's bowling were all scheduled to occur. And to go back to the from ends to trenches element that I talked about earlier, many of these players were in the military and played these seasons while they were on leave. There's a letter that was sent in 1994 or in 1993 requesting permission to organize all these international matches between quote our 2 brotherly republics, and for the release of the athletes since quote the majority are in the ranks of the army. And as you may notice, there are no actual soccer pictures here. These are all pictures from the commemoration of Victory Day in Croatia, which takes place in Dinar Knin Stadium, which was also the national stadium for the RSK. So they've repurposed the space to celebrate for the holiday that celebrates Operation Storm and the ending of the RSK. There was also a major civil society effort behind these. This newspaper, Derby, was instrumental in this. It was published by Glas Srpske beginning in April of 1994. And its official name was, translated name was Derby Sporting Newspaper of the Republika Srpska and Republic of Serbia and Krajina. So clearly outlining its reach and its goals. In its second issue, the RS Soccer Federation said that Derby was supplying an immeasurable contribution to the establishment of the Republika Srpska. And its 50th issue in 1985, editorial read, in a difficult time of war, scarcity, and uncertainty, Banja Luka and Glas Srpske had the courage to launch a specialized magazine only for sports. For sports in 2 countries, the once rest of the Drina, sport was and remains one of the exceptional segments of statecraft everywhere in the world, including here. That's why we wanted to, by creating Derby, contribute to the rise of sport, to spread its wings over the entire homeland and our brothers in the Krajina, to reflect what we are and who we are and how strong and indestructible we are. And as you see, one of the cartoon is
Mhm.
so Janjic there, the rectangle man, was a handball coach. Was the last Yugoslav handball coach. He was an ethnic Croat born in Bosnia. And as you can see, it's Franjo Tudjman offering him the Croatian coat of arms as he stands there with a shackle labeled HTZ. So this newspaper was not at all afraid to wade into the connections between sport and politics. And then to sort of go through the last little bit to show a parallel with the Basque Country. So the Basque Country began its soccer heritage from England. Bilbao was one of the most important ports in the world at the beginning of at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. And by 1882, soccer had spread there through British laborers. It's in fact the reason that the team in Bilbao is named Athletic Club in English. Franco, in fact, renamed it Atletico, which is still a dirty word if you in the Basque Country. And in fact, fun fact about that, he tried to outlaw the Basque language and Spanicize everything except for the team from Pamplona, whose name is Osasuna, which is the Basque word for health. And it's because Navarre supported Franco during the Civil War. So ironically, one of the only Basque words that was allowed in public in Franco Spain was the name of the soccer team, the word for health. But to sort of skip ahead, Spanish soccer owes a lot to the Basque Country. A lot of the early players were Basque. And the style that Spain originally played before the Pep Guardiola tiki-taka revolution was characterized as La Furia, like the fury, which has its roots in La Manera Inglesa, the English way, which is how Athletic Club Bilbao still plays. It's not to get into the tactics, but it's a heavy counter press way of playing. Instead of dominating possession, you soak up the other team's attacks and then hit them on the counter. And the Basque team at the Spanish team at the 1920 Olympics in Antwerp won the silver medal in large part thanks to their best player, who was a Basque, who then had to flee the country during the Civil War. Because he was organized in creating sporting events for the Basque Nationalist Party's youth wing. So after the Civil War, he was forced to live in exile in France and ultimately Mexico. So as the Civil War comes and Athletic Club disbands in 1937, the team essentially merges with the Basque national team, which then President Aguirre, who was himself a former member of Athletic Club, sends out on a massive world tour to France, Poland, the Soviet Union, Finland, Norway, Denmark, Mexico, Chile, and Cuba to raise awareness and funds for the Basque cause. Throughout the fall of 1938, the Basque delegation to the U.S. sent the President Aguirre updates almost monthly on the team's tour and how their cultural diplomacy was working. And the Francoists definitely took note. On September 15th, Aguirre sent a telegram saying that the fascists want to destroy the Basque team for propaganda. They menace the families of players. And to give an idea of how intertwined these were, the team's first match was on April 26, 1937, the same day that Guernica was bombed. They went to the Soviet Union they were invited to the Soviet Union on June 11th, 1937. 8 days later, Bilbao falls. The Soviet tour was dominated by the Basques and helped set them up as sort of a anti-fascist, leftist fighting force par excellence and gained them that reputation in the international community. However, the war ended when they were in Mexico. And so obviously they did not return. So this photo right here is actually the team stayed and played 1 year in the Mexican League. So for 1 year in 1938, 1939, in the Liga Mayor del Distrito Federal, the Mexico City top league, there was a Basque team. And in 1939, when they were in Paraguay, the team disbanded. The team did come back though in 1978 after the fall of Franco to play its first game. The most important match was against Ireland in 1979, which was held as a fundraiser for the Basque language. And they invited one of the members of the 1937 to 39 tour team to ceremonially kick off the game, explicitly drawing that connection. For that game, the team was named the Euskadiko Selección, which is the Basque national team in Basque. So by using the Basque language, by using the game as a fundraiser for the Basque language, it was a way to create to really make the team about the Basque country and about asserting the Basque independence and culture as a whole. And in 1982, Spain hosted the World Cup. The country won the bid under Franco, but it took place afterwards. There was a huge fear that the Basque group ETA would attack the World Cup as it came during the organization's most violent era. Spanish security forces mobilized 30,000 troops for the event and even set up perimeter guards around the national team as they went out on training. The ETA did not carry out violence, but did not remain silent. It released statements saying the World Cup was a political event of relevant importance for the regime of the pseudo-democratic monarchy because it sought to export at an international level a new image of trust and credibility in the international political process that counteracts the existing deteriorated one. It also said in a communication that the World Cup is not an end to itself, nor does it fulfill a military objective. For this reason, we will not boycott it, but we will continue developing our struggle independently apart from the celebration. A political party released several propaganda posters in the tournament that juxtapose scenes from Picasso's Guernica with slogans such as "Occupiers out," "No torture," and I unfortunately am not allowed to use these, but part of these posters on every poster is this little guy, Naranjito, the mascot for the World Cup, reimagined as a tank, shooting a soccer ball out of its cannon, rolling over a sort of splattered Basque flag that's meant to be the shape of the Basque country. It's a really interesting visual. It's on all. It's like a series of like 8 or so posters. It's a really interesting visual to try to as a way for them to again contest this sovereignty. In recent times, the Basque Soccer Federation has tried to petition for recognition, but Spain has a veto, so I don't think that's going anywhere anytime soon. But it's an interesting fact. So the 2020 European Championship that was held all over Europe, one of the venues was supposed to be Athletic Club Stadium in Bilbao. During a March, obviously it was delayed with the pandemic. On March 20th, 2021, at a match between Athletic Club and SD Eibar, who's another team in the Basque Country, a drone was flown into the stadium carrying a banner protesting the stadium selection as a host. It would have marked Spain's first games in the Basque Country since 1967. It was removed as a host due to the pandemic, due to pandemic reasons, not due to any other reason. And Spain has not come back for a game. And to conclude, I just want to have one quick anecdote from the 2022 World Cup that's pictured here to show that these things are still very relevant to people. So Croatia was drawn into a group with Canada. Wouldn't think there would be any major political issues there. Canada's goalie was a guy named Milan Borjan. He was born in Knin, fled in 1995 with Operation Storm, and at the time played for Red Star Belgrade. Sort of a perfect storm of potential issues for Croat fans. So during the game, he was heckled relentlessly. And he's also given interviews where he says, that his true country is Serbian Croatia. So during the game, he was heckled, and fans carried this flag of John Deere with Knin 95 and and crossing out "something runs like a deer" to make it read "nothing runs like Borjan." And part of the reason that John Deere imagery was used is because the iconic images coming out of Operation Storm of the fleeing ethnic Serbs, as a lot of them on tractors or horse-drawn carts. So it's a way to reinforce the feeling that they are sort of lesser, they're peasants, they're farmers, as opposed to the Croats. And thank you so much.
Thank you. To be quite honest with you, thank you for, for the wonderful presentation. If you allow us, we'll make some remarks and then we'll open it for the audience. I mean, it got me excited for obvious reasons, one, for two particular reasons, one, it reminded me an earlier project for me roaming around with my wife and kids, in the streets of Sofia, taking photographs of different political graffiti, which were kind of signifiers for certain political events. And my theory, that I was advancing is that you would see things on the wall that wouldn't make mainstream media. So this is an article I wrote about that. So this the one thing that really got me excited because I know how much those murals, graffitis, and so on, specifically in specific communities would mean. Specifically in our region, we're talking about Serbia and Croatia. Now, this is the first one. The second one, of course, is my comment that football or soccer, as you would call it, we call it football. I don't know. So is functioning as and always has been functioning probably ever since its establishment as an arena for two things, right? One, in the world of sociology and anthropology, this is a reenactment, and this is why I thought that it was so appropriate, the title of your presentation, this chapter, war minus the shooting. It is actually the tribal reenactment every weekend of different tribal clans, without supposedly having the casualties, so we are reenacting our primitive past, if you will. So it has high stakes, but it also has been, and it's interesting that socialism was not able to eradicate the sort of loyalties that certain communities based on religion, geography, including inner city geography and so on, and their belonging. In fact, all of those were used in communism and especially in post-communism to reinforce sort of and use the agitki or, and I'll say Bulgarian, but the hooligans, as you would call them, fan clubs, as instruments, proxies for political forces. Now, the extreme case that you have shown us, right, it's Akans and Obilic and, the Tigers, or, the Croatian, volunteers. So one thing is, I'm drawing on sort of conventional political sort of philosophy and theory. And it is that, my first praise to your presentation, beyond the fact that you have fantastic visual material and, it's a really good comparative historical overview about the intersection between football specifically, the people's sport, because it was always interesting to the rulers as probably, what they call muscle sport or the sport of the masses. You will see that when we have those sort of interconnections very tightly, as expressions of identity, what I immediately, while you were doing this, I was just checking, like the classic Harry Eckstein, who's demonstrating, the preconditions and precipitants. So you were showing literally, the match that started the war. In fact, in Latin America, you do have football wars. You're aware of that, right? That starts a conflict. So it's not the football per se, but because it is actually the precipitant, the trigger event. The precondition is, as you were showing us, that all of these fractions actually do belong either, to, as I said, territorial ethnic. So just to step away, I'll give you an example for the city that I was born in. So Sofia has four major teams traditionally, or had. So Slavia, which is the oldest team in the country, but it's also been associated with royal support and the so-called old-timers, and they are in a particular section of the city, so it's kind of like Real Madrid, local style. But it's not hugely popular. It's always been there, but it's, they do have Levski Sofia, which is literally, I'll use, the Bulgarian expression, People's Club, which is the club of the people, Guatemala. They do have CSK Sofia, its biggest rival. Interestingly, they pick the color just like with the, Yugoslavian and Serbian context, it's always red and blue. And then we have Lokomotiv, which is, was associated. Now, my first question is, did you account for the fact that during socialism, because of all of this long introduction that I've done, and as a football fan, I will confess my biases because I know everybody will be like, oh, clearly you're not saying that you're a CSK, and I, every weekend, grew up on the stadium, rooting for CSK. My first question is, did you account for the fact that socialism co-opted some of those themes and associated them with formal institutions? Now, I'll give you an example. CSK until today is known as the army scheme. And so is, in Serbia, and that's why you have those transnational connections between, let's say, Grobari, which is do you know why they call them Grobari, by the way?
I mean, grave diggers.
Yeah, but do you know why? Because their stadium is located to the cemetery of the country. But even the name partisan, right? So they're black and so their colors are not red, so they're black and white.
With former president of the club, Franjo Tudjman.
Yeah, and you do have, connections between, so, and then you have teams which are known as such as all the Dynamos or like here, or the police teams. In Bulgaria, the one that was associated and formally, associated was Levski. And you had this bitter rivalry because it reflected something beyond that. It was about the occupation, but it was also a signifier where you're coming from. If you say, I'm rooting for Slavia, everybody will say, oh, you're an old Sofia aristocracy, like prior to the, most likely, that's like a stereotype that clings. And it's interesting how it carries. The reason is that you made this parallel, which I've seen with my own eyes in Scotland, which supposedly it's an entirely different league, but in that year, when I was at the University of Aberdeen, they had to move the old firm, I believe, for security reasons, because you always, unfortunately, it's always coupled marred with violence, in this case, knifings and so on. And I know that there were a lot of protests, even from the Scottish public as to what country are we in, because every Celtic game, they're flying the Irish flags and, they're having this. So my first thing is, have you made this association or a parallel to think about what institutions actually, they were attached, at least in the Balkan region, that's valid for Red Star, Partizan, Dinamo, and so on. And the other thing is, have you considered the element also of religion? When you look at, the participant support among, in Yugoslavian case, I think it's fascinating because it's, again, those are signifiers that put you either in one spot or another camp and so on. And by the way, number two, a suggestion, if you're gonna be, continuing with this project, like further on, an update, take a look at the generational, pre and post-communist sort of inheritance. My hypothesis is that some of those ties, formed of identities, starting from, judging, and I'm not trying to generalize, just by observation, what I have seen, those loyalties actually cross generational lines. So a whole family, my whole family, for instance, roots, on my end for CSK, even if this is long gone, there is, the golden years of Stoichkov are no more. And then we do have another family members, which are, rooted absolutely with Levski, and, their kids are socialized with them. You don't, more or less, you don't choose. It's like when your parents take your dad takes you to the stadium, and it takes some sort of a rupture, to get out of the, the supporting camp. Sorry, it was long, but that tells you how happy I am.
If anyone else has other questions, should I collect them then?
I mean, Mary has to, are you gonna?
Well, I saw that Chelsea had a question.
I do have a question, by the way.
Yeah, no, I'm good listening to other people's
Oh,
questions.
hi. No, I didn't have a question. I just had a lot of hype. So, I'll let you go first, Mary. I'll come up with a question, but I really enjoyed this. I'm gonna go back on mute because I'm home with my sick kiddo.
I guess with a couple, like thinking about the kind of I guess, broader conclusions of what you're trying to say. Like, can we think, so are you thinking sports as sort of a driver of conflict? Or are you thinking of it as having a kind of release valve effect on people's conflict where, you know, instead of actually killing each other, which they all did that too, but that the, you know, sort of, this is a way for us to, yeah, like kind of fight it out without actually, you know, having, well, a lot of sports are really violent, but I was also thinking about how the dramatics of soccer, so I'm not a huge soccer fan, but I've become one. And there's so much fakery, like where you pretend you were really hurt, you know, like, so you can get the foul and something.
Mhm.
You know, I'm just thinking of sort of dramatics of it and also the audience, like the fact that it's in the stadium, you have this enormous amount of people watching, and that the hooligans are enacting a lot of this in the seats, you know, and sort of what's happening, I guess, in the actual stadium, the process, and how is that being controlled or not being controlled by different kind of security forces, like, but so, you know, like, I guess, where does this sort of leave us in understanding these conflicts in the aftermath? Like, is this, do you think the conflicts are continuing in a way, like, is it, as opposed to mitigating conflict, is it actually keeping the conflict alive? And then Chelsea, did you say you had a question as well?
She said she could come up with
Oh,
one.
okay, because I thought you had your hand up. Okay. But, it's a challenge.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And so is Liza.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, I'll go. Well, I have a few, but they're just kind of like short ones there, which may not have an answer. I was kind of interested, I was wondering, like, have there ever been any contested teams or contested players? If so, how do those conflicts play out? Or are there ever conversely any kind of, in a weird way, shared teams or players? I was kind of wondering on the international stage, for instance, if you end up doing like an all-country team, I can imagine players from very different teams that are very different clubs that have very different alignments or have different alignments thrust upon them being put into a collaborative environment. And I'd be really interested, like, has that ever played out? What does that look like?
I'm interested in question of some remarks, you know, maybe you can use this opinion for your like future research. Like your topic absolutely remind me, you know, like Ukrainian case. It's because, you know, like we have two, like you told, like two absolutely like famous football team, not soccer.
You know, technically like that.
It's like, you know, like, I'm like, correct, it's like soccer, like, what, football? Yeah, it's about like, Dynamo, Kiev, like capital, and Shakhtar, like minor, if you translate in English, yeah, it's like, Shakhtar, yeah. If you speak about like East Ukraine, you know, and, sometimes when this team like play together, so it's like ultras exist from both of sides, you know. Sometimes it was very scared to build the stadium at like that time. But this case about Shakhtar and Dynamo, it's more interesting for me. So, like you can use it, you know, like another examples of this, like when we use sports. In this case, it's very interesting because it's not only like sport, it's absolutely like political competitions between, you know, like East, because like East, like Donbass, Donetsk, you know, like minor industry, like heavy industry and everything, and Kiev as a center of Ukraine, you know, it's like Donetsk was a center of like Eastern Ukraine, Kiev is like center of center Ukraine and Ukraine like in general. And another side, it's about, you know, like influences of the oligarchs, because like these teams absolutely supported different, you know, like very famous Ukrainian oligarchs. Yeah, and in this case, you know, like we can discover the situation not only from the like sport as a game, like but like as political game, yeah. So if you want, you can like, you know, like use this example for your further future research and just I don't know, maybe psychological like philosophy, maybe philosophy question about, do you agree that sport is more diversifying and less common in such situation, like in general? So what do you think about it? Like it,
Should you restate that? Say that again.
do you agree that sport is more diversifying and less common in such situations? So what do you think? Like sport, we can use like combine, you know, like
So it's more divisive than.
Okay.
Yeah, like an instrument of division.
Yeah.
Mhm. Thank you.
Okay.
That's a lot of questions.
Yes.
I know, and there's a comment as well. Oh, no, there is another question, by the
There's
way,
another
we're
question.
collecting, and while Adam Tanzel is about to post his question, I'm just gonna read. Chelsea says there was once a really interesting situation in Kosovo where an ethnic Serbian player played for the national team. I assume that this is for what Eliza was referring to. Adam, it's you.
And then I was gonna say, one of
Oh.
the biggest countries in international soccer is Switzerland, Serbia, because
Yeah.
there's so many Kosovars
Kosovars.
And flying up drones, right?
Yeah, I mean,
that's-
they're devoted to 18 World
I write
Cup.
about that in my book, yes.
Shaqiri and Shaka both throwing up the Albanian double-headed eagle after they score.
Yep.
In Serbia in 2022, Serbia goes into their locker room with a giant Kosovo Serbia flag. So
Also too, because they had Swiss players throwing up the eagle who aren't even Albanian. So that was a really fun match. Yeah.
Yeah, it's about to imitate. Adam, go ahead.
So my question was, have you kind of looked at the like possible splits within the clubs and how that affects the overall club health, but then also the division at a larger kind of national level? Because here in Prague, actually, we have a local team who in 2020 actually split over COVID regulations. So the manager comes out and says, well, we're not going to follow COVID regulations. The club, though, got extremely split over it and kind of fractured in a way where it hasn't really recovered since 2020. And I think maybe looking at like ahistorical social splits, specifically at a club level, also might be worth looking at, or something along those natures. Because I would say there is well, just weird thinking in this case, because 2020 split was more devastating than in like 2006 and 2007, the same club was actually considered like a far right, hooligan centered, Nazi kind of band of people. But it stayed alive until 2020 when something that just came out of the blue kind of really destroyed it more so. So I don't know, just worth thinking about.
Do you mind just sharing the name of the club if possible, or that's
Yeah, it's
you?
called Victoria Žižkov. I'll put it in the chat.
Okay, I thought so, but just to make sure.
that's it. Thank you all for all the questions. Yes, I will go. Yes, I'll try to group a few because a few of them have similar answers. So I think that a few of the questions revolved around sort of like sports as a driver of conflict versus reflector of conflict versus release valve, and I think it's all three. And I think one of the big things that sports serves today in these regions is a way of sort of, as I talked about in the beginning, like social division being predicated on the symbolic presence of the other, even when there isn't a physical presence of the other. And it's a way to keep those tensions present in people's minds. So you have something like the Milan Borjan incident at the 2022 World Cup. Like if there weren't those 30 years of history, something like that wouldn't, or like it's the fact that Borjan was an ethnic Serb from Knin who fled in 1995 and who played for Red Star at the time. It was just sort of one thing after another that sort of built him up into, a boogeyman for right-wing Croatian fans. And so I think there's that element of it. And I think one of the things I would point to show that is, so if you think about the geography of Croatia, there are the two primary teams I mentioned, Dinamo Zagreb and Hajduk Split. By far the biggest teams in the country, like Rijeka has a strong local following, Osijek has a strong local following. Outside of that, almost everyone in the country is going to be a Dinamo Zagreb fan or a Hajduk Split fan. And it's based on your geography. You know, if you're from the coast, you're a Split fan. If you're from inland, you're a Dinamo fan. And because of that, they have a hugely intense rivalry. There's a lot of hooligan issues even to this day and that sort of stuff. And they, you know, if you go into Split, you'll see someone will spray paint the Dinamo D and then someone will cross it out.
Mhm.
Someone will spray paint the
Graffiti walls.
Hajduk Torcida, cross it out. So that's a huge element of sort of, these graffiti wars between the clubs. The one place in Croatia where that does not happen is Vukovar. In Vukovar, both exist side by side, and there's not really, you see it occasionally, but there's not really a huge culture of trying to outdo one another. And part of that is because, well, one, Vukovar is the most served place in Croatia, so there is the presence of the ethnic other there. So it's a way to take up wall space to prevent ethnic Serbs that are there from putting up Red Star stuff or putting up Partizan stuff. And two, it's a way to show that the city is a place for all Croats. It is a Croat city and it is a city for all Croats by having these two major fan groups able to coexist there in ways that, you know, they couldn't in Zagreb or they couldn't in Split or they couldn't in Dubrovnik or Karlovac or whatever. So that's part of it, you know, sort of keeping this, because I mean, I cannot tell you the last time that Red Star and Dinamo played each other, or in an European competition, or even Serbia and Croatia played each other. Like it's incredibly rare. So because there isn't this actual element of people coming into contact with each other through sports, they sort of have this psychological element of like they're still there. We haven't forgotten May 13th, 1990. That still looms very large. And I think sort of related to that, it sort of also ties into your question about like the dynamics and the dramatics of it, and you know,
Pardon me.
the fact that the photo that I showed of the memorial in Zagreb was taken on an anniversary, but there are votive candles there all the time and rosaries there all the time. So it's part of it is a performative element. I mean, if you have watched or been to a soccer game in the Balkans, like if you watch Liverpool and think that their fans go over the top with how much stuff they have going on in the crowd at the time, it is peanuts compared to what you see in the Balkans.
And the pyrotechnics.
Yeah, like I went to a Hajduk Dinamo game and fans literally lit the net on fire by throwing flares. So, you know, it's just like, you know, I think it is part of that dramatics, and it's a way to sort of keep that cohesion among the groups, you know, and I showed all the, getting to your question about the generational divide, one thing that's really interesting is almost all the murals. So almost all the murals that you see in Croatia are of hooligan origin. And the people that are mostly painting them, even the ones about the war, are not veterans. They're that next generation. It's
Fantastic.
kids in their 20s, going out and repainting or whatever.
So that would that be similar to the dynamics that you witnessed in Northern Ireland, where actually, you know, people that were not, you know, their parents were in the troubles, but they themselves don't have necessarily, you know, but they still go and repaint and, you know.
Yes, I would say Northern Ireland, mural painting serves a little different function in Northern Ireland because it's become such an art form.
Mhm.
So a lot of times in communities, there are like dedicated painters.
Oh, okay.
Sort of like, or dedicated groups that will go out and do them. So it is a similar dynamic, and you basically like, you almost see like kids apprenticing with them to sort of become that next generation. As opposed to just like, these murals are obviously very coordinated and all that, but they're more, I think this impression that I get is that they're less sort of like built through the community, like a lot of the
It's
murals in
state
Northern
driven, you know.
Yeah.
people that-
Yeah, a lot of the murals in Northern Ireland are sort of like, well, community gets together, decides what they want to paint, that they sort of farm it out to whoever's painting it, that sort of stuff. Whereas these, I think, are much more like just this group goes out and decides they want to paint a mural. On the question of, so I'll group the during socialism question and then the shared or contested teams. I didn't get a chance to talk about this, but I think Mostar's team is a really good example of this. So Mostar has two teams. There's Velej, which is the Bosniak team, and then there's Zrinski, which is the Croat team. So Zrinski was around since like the 1920s,
Mhm.
and then participated in the independent sort of state of Croatia's league during the war, during World War II. So when the communists come in, they shut the club down. In the 1990s, the club gets resurrected and becomes much more explicitly Croat nationalist.
Mhm.
And I think a good indication of that. So that in Mostar, there's only one stadium because during the socialist years, there was just the one team, so there's just the one stadium. It's on the Croat side of the divide.
So they were sharing the stadium.
Well, Zrinski didn't exist
Oh,
until it didn't exist from 1945 to 1992. I think 92, 93. So, but during the war, that stadium was used as a camp. So Velej gets kicked out. Velej still plays during the war, but plays the way the Bosniak League was set up was like basically there are four teams in three different cities that were not on the front lines. So Velej is playing up, I think in Jablanica, it's in their little quad. So Zrinski moves into the stadium. It's it's used as camp. Zrinski moves in after the war and sort of squatters' rights, is it? Kind of. They get signed, they get a 99-year lease. But there's a monument in the stadium that was built to the members of Velej who died during the war. It has since been, the plaque has been taken off and it has been painted over with the Croatian Shahovnica. So you see this element of sort of what is like whose team is what, and Velej was always a very communist, even before socialism began in Yugoslavia. They were always a very communist team, always a very multi-ethnic team. In the years since the war, they've been sort of defaulted into the Bosniak team and have sort of taken up that, like the Srebrenica mural I showed was a Velej mural. So they've sort of taken up that Bosniak mantle in this divided city.
Well, I want to hear more, but actually, we have to run to a meeting it starts at 1:30. So I'm happy to have the conversation continue, but I think we're gonna formally end Balkan Circle today.
thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.